Okay, I'm here today to talk about 30 FPS and why I personally don't think it's acceptable in 2024, and then we're gonna go over a gaming journalist's attempt to defend 30 FPS. Now, I'm talking about the PS5 and Series X here, I'm not talking about last generation, and I'm not talking about the Nintendo Switch because it's a portable console. Now, there's three main reasons I don't like 30 FPS, the first being it adds input delay. The delay between you pressing a button and seeing that action on your screen is gonna be higher the lower your frame rate is. This is why it's extremely hard to play games like first-person shooters or anything that requires quick reaction times if you're only at 30 FPS. Even 60 feels a little bit slow for these type of games. So games like Call of Duty on next-generation consoles actually play at 120 FPS now. The second reason I don't like 30 FPS is because we've been stuck at 30 FPS since the Nintendo 64. I feel like as technology evolves, so should the smoothness of games. If resolution can improve so much over the years, then why can't frame rate as well? The third reason, and most important in my opinion, is Microsoft and Sony said to expect better performance than the Xbox One and PS4, yet the games are performing at the same frame rate. So whether you think 30 is acceptable or not, that doesn't change the fact that you were lied to. When I buy a console that says 4K 120 FPS on the side of the box, I shouldn't be getting games running at a fourth of that, especially not Xbox exclusive games like Redfall and Starfield. In PlayStation's case, I'm pretty sure Forspoken ran at 30 FPS and that game was a pile of shit. Now I'm gonna go over some common defenses for 30 FPS and explain why I disagree with them. The first one I always hear is movies play in 24 FPS and we all find those fine. My response to that is, in a movie you don't have to control the movie. You don't feel the input delay on a movie, whereas you do in a game. You don't have to react fast in a movie, whereas you do in a game. The second defense I hear is, well, I don't notice the difference between 30 FPS and 60 FPS, and you know, that's great, like I'm glad you don't notice a difference between the two, but for a lot of us, especially those of us who played on PC on really high frame rates, we definitely notice a difference. The third defense I hear a lot is, who cares? A great argument, dude. But the article we're taking a look at today comes from Make Use Of, and it's called 3 Reasons Why 30 FPS Console Gaming Isn't As Bad As You Think. While playing at 60 FPS over 30 FPS on your console can seem like a no-brainer, there are some reasons why the latter might be more favorable. I don't know why you'd prefer a game at 30 FPS over 60, I'm assuming this person is talking about games that are at 30 FPS so they have better graphics. And my response to that is, I care more about how a game feels rather than how a game looks. At the end of the day, I'm here to play a game, not really watch it. Like, all these little details on the leaves and shit don't really matter to me if the game doesn't feel nice. Video games and specs come hand in hand, with most gamers holding high spec and high performance gaming experiences on a pedestal. So you wouldn't be wrong if you were to take the age-old argument for 60 FPS over 30 FPS gaming at face value and favor the faster frame rate. Now I decided just for the hell of it to go onto my channel and do a poll and see what would people rather out of 3 options: 1080p 120 FPS, a compromise 1440p 60 FPS, or 4K 30 FPS. And I was not surprised in the slightest by the results. The majority of gamers prefer 120 FPS if possible. The second most popular option is 60 FPS, and the least desirable option is 30 FPS, even with a higher resolution. So why developers pick 4K 30 over 1080p 120 or 1440p 60? Who knows? However, when it comes to console gaming, there are some reasons you may find 30 FPS to be acceptable and more applicable to your gaming experience. But what factors can align console gaming with 30 FPS over 60 FPS? Let's find out. Well, I mean, once again, let's hop back to the poll. Only 3% of people said they would favor 30 FPS over the other options, so it's like a very small minority of people actually prefer 4K 30. And personally, I do not think 30 FPS is acceptable, and once again, I've already went over the reasons why. You were promised better. That should be enough. That right there is a good enough reason as to why all games should be at 60 at least. Because you were told that you'd get better. You went out and you paid under the assumption that you'd be getting at least 60 FPS, you'd be getting better performance than last generation. If you promise 60 FPS, you better deliver 60 FPS, it's as simple as that, keep your word. The first reason on this article is 30 FPS can benefit games that focus on high visual fidelity. One of the biggest benefits you'll find with games that utilize 30 over 60 frames per second is how the lower frame rate enables your game to run at a higher fidelity. For most current-gen PlayStation 5 or Xbox Series games, visuals are paramount, and with the number of effects, resources, and rendering required for games increasing, console games benefit from having more time to process and portray visuals in high fidelity. Well, I've already showed earlier with the 4K 30 versus 1080p 120 and 1440p 60 chart that I had there, that most people prefer a better running game rather than a better looking. There's also been studies done which shows that people prefer a better frame rate over a better resolution. And this is where frames per second becomes imperative to visual experience. Simply put, 60 FPS games will render and provide you with 60 frames to observe per second, but 30 FPS shows half the numbers of images per second and provides double the time to render each image. Not only does a 60 FPS game give you 60 frames to observe something, it also gives you 60 frames to react to that thing, whereas 30 FPS would only give you 30 frames to react to that thing. Simply put, 60 FPS allows you to play better than 30 FPS. Why do you think all these PC players on these competitive games play at crazy high frame rates? For games reliant on their visuals being as high fidelity as possible, having twice the amount of time to ensure visuals look as good as possible can be essential. So for some console experiences, you'll find that a set 30 FPS will actually benefit your visual gaming experience. But is a better looking game worth half your performance? Is it worth double the amount of input lag? Like, is it seriously worth it just to have some higher details on the leaves and pavement and stuff you're just gonna run past anyway? I can see where somebody would prefer the 30 FPS with better visuals on a Telltale game or something where you don't have to really interact with it in real time, but I mean, for a game like a shooter especially, you're gonna really need that 60 FPS or above. As with anything, 30 FPS is a trade-off. If you enjoy fast-paced games that require split-second decisions, 60 FPS provides more information per second and would be more essential than 30 FPS. So while 30 FPS benefits visuals, there are many arguments for and against each type of frame rate. But see, the problem is, we're getting games that require split-second movements and shooters and stuff like that are coming out at 30 FPS. Starfield and Redfall came out at 30 FPS, and those are games where sometimes you're gonna have to make split-second movements. And it's kinda harder to do that at 30 FPS than it would be at 60 FPS. I noticed my aim struggling due to the fact that Starfield and Redfall were 30 FPS. The second reason they have here is choosing 30 FPS over 60 FPS can improve console stability. Another way you may find 30 FPS more applicable to your console gaming experience is through the balancing act that goes into a console's game performance pool on a certain platform. Specifically, a console title needs to balance elements like frame rate, game complexity, and resolution against the performance limitations of the platform in question. This represents a triangle of needs that often has to shift and change to meet performance demands. But the thing is, these things, game complexity, resolution, and performance aren't being balanced because every single time it's 4K 30. It's never 1080p 60. It's never 1080p 120. It's never 1440p 60. It's always 4K and 30. Why does the performance always have to get cut so it can have a good resolution and good game complexity? Why can't you reduce the resolution and get a good performing game and a complex game? Why are we always cutting performance? I mean, I've already showed that most people prefer a better performing game rather than a better looking game. And there are studies done on this. Well, I think I know the reason. It's easier to market good graphics rather than good performance. There's probably people out there who don't even know what a frame rate is, and those are the people that are impressed when they hear 4K. They don't care if the game plays like shit. As soon as they hear 4K, they're in. But for us who've been gaming for a long time, we know what a frame rate is, and we notice when it's low. There are many reasons to play PlayStation 5 titles in performance mode where 60 FPS may be reachable, but this can often only be achieved by reducing other elements of your game. Commonly, games will be locked to 30 FPS to reduce the strain on performance and increase console stability. Okay, if your console can't run at a stable 60 FPS, there's a fucking problem. I mean, the console specs are close to an RTX 2070 Super, I think, which is my old graphics card. If that can't stay at 60, then there's a fucking optimization problem. It's nothing to do with the PlayStation 5 or Series X itself. It's the fact that these developers don't know how to optimize for shit. 30 FPS is regarded as a reliable compromise when balancing performance and stability on consoles. Most console games are fine utilizing 30 FPS unless 60 FPS is essential to the experience. So as a way to guarantee stability and prevent issues, 30 FPS represents a great compromise that provides you with a consistently reliable way to game on console. It's not a compromise though, because it says 120 FPS on the console and we're getting a fourth of that. We're getting the bare fucking minimum for a game to be playable. A compromise would be downing the game's resolution to 1440p instead of 1080p and then going up from 30 FPS to 60. Also, 30 FPS definitely isn't fucking great. His third reason is 30 FPS is more consistent on gaming consoles. Another reason you may prefer 30 FPS on consoles, especially over 60, is because of how well optimized 30 FPS is on console platforms like PlayStation and Xbox. But here's the thing. If it was well optimized, it wouldn't have to run at 30 FPS. It'd be able to run at 60 or 120. I mean, Doom Eternal can run at 120 FPS 1440p. Doom Eternal can run 4K 60. That is an example of a well-optimized game. Other forms of gaming, like PC gaming, face completely different levels of complexity when it comes to optimization. PCs have countless amounts of specs and potential devices the game can be played on. For this reason, 30 FPS can feel worse on PC than on consoles. Even using a keyboard and mouse, which can allow you to react faster in games than a controller, will highlight flaws in frame rate as the game races to catch up with your inputs, as this is before you attempt things like optimizing Windows for PC gaming or any other operating system you're planning on playing a 30 FPS game with. But on consoles, all games are optimized to the universal specifications of a platform, as opposed to the unique factors of individual gaming PC setups. Yeah, that's what makes it even more pathetic if the game can only run at 30. The result is a smoother, more consistent experience of 30 FPS gaming. Yeah, I definitely wouldn't call it fucking smooth, especially if you're on a high sensitivity, you're gonna feel that fucking input lag. So while PC 30 FPS gaming may leave you desperate for a boost up to 60, on consoles 30 FPS feels intuitive and less likely to leave you wanting more. I don't know, when I go out and I pay for a platform that I'm told will get better FPS than last generation, I kind of want more than I had last generation, and last generation we had 30 FPS. Matter of fact, the generation before that we had 30 FPS as well. Like, are we gonna be on 30 FPS on consoles forever? Like, well, what's going on here? Why are we not seeing any improvements over all these years? 30 FPS console gaming is an acceptable way to play, not on a platform where you're told you're gonna get 60. 30 FPS sometimes feels like a neglected element of modern gaming, and if you play primarily on PC, that may be justifiable, but for consoles, there are plenty of reasons 30 FPS is more than satisfactory and even complementary to the overall gaming experience. Yeah, tell that to Redfall, which I literally had to give up because my aiming felt so fucking delayed. And you claiming that 30 FPS is more than satisfactory, does that mean you're okay with like 20 FPS? However, there is still an argument that specific games will always be better with higher frame rates like first-person shooters. But see, the thing is, we're still getting shooters at 30 FPS. We're still getting fast action-paced games at 30 FPS. But story-led visual experiences may naturally lend themselves to 30 FPS. In the end, there will always be exceptions to a preference for 60 FPS or 30 FPS gaming. Well, that's the article. It was pretty bad. What are my main issues with 30 FPS? First of all, we were promised more. That enough justifies why every game should be running at 60. You promise 60, you deliver. Second of all, we were at 30 FPS 20 years ago. You're telling me in 20 years you can't make games any smoother? And third of all, finally, it hurts games like first-person shooters or any game where you have to react quickly by adding input delay. Alright, peace.